The night was alive with thunderous cheers. Wembley Stadium trembled as Freddie Mercury commanded the stage in his white tank top and jeans, his microphone stand tilted like a sword in his hand. He had just led the crowd through a roaring chorus of Radio Gaga, and 70,000 voices echoed back at him with electric devotion. The air itself seemed charged, almost holy, and then it happened. From the front rows, piercing through the noise like a fragile cry, a young woman's voice rose above the chaos. "Freddie, please, I need to ask you something." It wasn't the usual scream of adoration. It wasn't a request for a song or an autograph. It was desperate, trembling, almost pleading. Freddie stopped mid-gesture. His hand froze on the microphone, and the band fell silent behind him, instruments hanging in suspension. The giant stadium, seconds earlier, a sea of sound, suddenly felt like a cathedral where even the air refused to move. 70,000 fans held their breath, staring at the Queen frontman. The spotlight shifted slightly, searching the crowd until it found her, a young woman, fragile, clutching something in her hands. Her voice wavered again, but everyone heard it this time. "Freddie, will you answer me?" The world's most flamboyant performer, a man who could make stadiums quake with laughter or tears, stood utterly still. For the first time that night, Freddie Mercury looked speechless. For a heartbeat, Freddie didn't move. Then his eyes softened. He lifted one hand, palm open, a conductor quieting an orchestra, and the murmur that had begun to ripple across the stands melted back into silence. "All right, darling," he said, voice warm but careful. "If you've got something to ask, let's do it properly." He glanced toward the wings and traced a small circle in the air. House lights, just a touch. The stadium brightened a shade, enough for Freddie to find her again. He stepped to the very lip of the stage, the half-mic stand angled like a walking cane, and leaned forward with an intimacy that somehow reached the last row. "What's your name, love?" he asked. The woman hesitated, clutching the object to her chest. "Anna," she managed, barely above a whisper that still seemed to carry. Freddie nodded, repeating it gently. "Anna." As if learning a note before singing it true, he motioned to a security steward with a quiet flick, not commanding, inviting. "Let's make sure Anna can breathe in all this excitement," he teased, offering a quick grin to ease the tension. A paper cup of water appeared, and Freddie, instead of tossing a joke or a flamboyant aside, simply waited. The pause was uncharacteristic, and therefore devastating. The showman, who could swallow a stadium with one shout, was now giving the stage to a single voice. When she looked up again, Freddie lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with hers across the barricade. The gesture shrank Wembley to a room, Queen to a conversation. "You've come all this way," he said softly, "so ask me your question, and I'll do my best not to make a mess of the answer." A ripple of affectionate laughter rose and died. The spell held. Anna pressed the object, small, rectangular, closer. Freddie noticed it, and his expression changed by a degree, the hint of concern, the kindness of someone who understood that some requests are not for spectacle. He tilted the mic away from his mouth, letting his next words fall only halfway into the system. "No rush, darling. We're not going anywhere." The band behind him stood motionless, hands poised above strings and keys, watching their frontman trade thunder for tenderness. And in that suspended hush, with 70,000 witnesses, Freddie Mercury, master of crescendos, chose a whisper as his opening note. It was July 1986, and Wembley Stadium was packed to its limits. More than 70,000 fans had come to witness Queen at the height of their powers. The lights painted the night sky, the amplifiers thundered like rolling storms, and Freddie Mercury stood at the very center of it all, larger than life. For Britain, These concerts were more than music. They were cultural events, moments when an entire generation felt bound together by sound and spectacle. But amid the massive crowd and the grandeur of the occasion, one young woman had carried a secret heavier than the weight of the stadium itself. Her name was Anna, a university student barely in her 20s, who had traveled miles to be there. Unlike the others who came to celebrate, she arrived with trembling hands and a fragile hope. She needed to ask Freddie Mercury a question that had been burning inside her for years. Anna wasn't just another fan, screaming from the stands. Observers near her noticed she clutched something in her hands, a small envelope, worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. Her friends said she had debated even coming to the show, but something in her heart insisted this was her chance. If anyone could understand her pain, it was Freddie, the man who sang not only with brilliance, but with a kind of aching truth that pierced straight through the soul. Freddie, of course, didn't know any of this when he stepped onto the Wembley stage. For him, it was another night to prove that Queen still reigned supreme, another night to lift his audience into ecstasy with every note. But when his eyes caught Anna's face in the crowd, when her trembling voice rose above the roars, everything changed. In that instant, Wembley stopped being a concert and became something else entirely, the setting for a moment of pure human connection. Behind the flamboyance, Freddie was a man who carried his own battles, secrets, and questions. Perhaps that's why Anna's voice reached him so deeply. He knew, even before she spoke her question, that it wasn't the kind meant for applause. It was the kind meant for the heart. The stadium had fallen into a strange kind of silence, the kind that feels heavier than any sound. Thousands of faces turned toward the young woman, while the band members exchanged uncertain glances. Roger Taylor kept his sticks poised above the drums. Brian May froze with his guitar slung low, and John Deacon's hand lingered nervously on the neck of his bass. All of them waited for Freddie to decide what came next. Anna's voice had cracked. The invincible rhythm of the night, and now the pressure inside Wembley was palpable. Some fans began to murmur restlessly. Was this a trick, a stunt, or something more serious? The tension climbed higher with every second Freddie hesitated. For a man who lived off instinct and flamboyance, this was different. He wasn't preparing a witty comeback or a playful joke. His eyes stayed locked on the fragile figure in the front row. The producers backstage grew restless. A show of this magnitude was timed down to the second. Every light cue, every camera angle, every note mattered. Stopping meant chaos, and chaos meant headlines. But Freddie had never been one to bow to convention. He could feel 70,000 pairs of eyes on him, demanding a decision. Would he laugh it off and carry on with the set, or would he do the unthinkable and halt the greatest rock spectacle on earth for one trembling voice? A hush ran through the stadium like a wave retreating before a storm. Freddie shifted his weight, his hand gripping the microphone stand tighter. He glanced at Anna again, then back at the immense crowd stretching into the night. You could almost see the battle in his expression, the showman versus the man. The audience leaned forward as if sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. And then, with a deep breath that trembled just slightly, Freddie Mercury stepped away from the music. He raised his hand once more to quiet the crowd completely. "Not yet," he said softly, almost to himself, but the words echoed through the sound system, sending a ripple of anticipation across Wembley. At that moment, the spectacle paused. No lights, no music, just silence, suspense, and a question hanging in the air that hadn't even been asked yet. Anna finally gathered the courage. Her voice, though trembling, pierced the silence of Wembley like a prayer. "Freddie, do you believe love can save a life?" It was not a request for a song, not a cry of devotion. It was a question that belonged to the soul, not the stage. For a heartbeat, Freddie's lips parted, but no sound came out. The man who could shatter the night with a single high note suddenly found himself without words. The crowd, sensing the weight of the moment, leaned into the silence. Even the cameras, which usually swept across the sea of faces, held still, focusing on Freddie's expression as his eyes glistened under the harsh white lights. He tapped the microphone against his lips once, twice, as if searching for an answer, hidden in the rhythm of his heartbeat. Finally, Freddie lowered the mic and let his voice carry, deep and raw. "Darling," he began, his tone stripped of theatrics, "love is the only thing that ever saved me." The words rolled across the stadium, fragile yet thunderous, echoing into every corner. The audience erupted, not with screams this time, but with something closer to reverence. Some clapped, some wiped away tears, others simply stood frozen, aware they had just witnessed something rare. Freddie Mercury without the mask of the showman, speaking straight from his core. And then, in a gesture no one expected, Freddie extended his hand toward Anna. Security hesitated, but he waved them aside. "Come here, love," he said softly. The crowd gasped as the girl was lifted over the barrier and guided onto the stage. Freddie helped her up, steadying her trembling hands, and in that instant Wembley no longer felt like 70,000 strangers. It felt like one family, holding its breath together. When Anna's feet touched the stage, the entire stadium erupted, not with the deafening roar of a rock anthem, but with a thunder of applause that carried warmth instead of frenzy. It was as if 70,000 hearts beat in unison, offering their strength to the fragile figure standing beside Freddie Mercury. Freddie leaned close to her, his arm gently resting across her shoulders, and whispered something only she could hear. Whatever those words were, they made her nod through tears, clutching that small envelope she had carried all night. Then, in a move that would become legendary, Anna placed it in Freddie's hands. The cameras captured it. The lights reflected off it, and in that instant the envelope became a symbol far greater than paper. It became the embodiment of a plea, a secret, a truth entrusted to the world's most flamboyant star. Freddie held the envelope against his chest, eyes shimmering. Then, instead of rushing back into the show, he turned to the microphone with a trembling smile. "This," he said, raising it high enough for the audience to see, "reminds us all that love isn't just a word we sing about. It's real. It's here. And sometimes," his voice cracked slightly, "it's the only thing strong enough to keep us alive." The crowd responded with waves of emotion. Some fans sobbed openly, others raised lighters and scarves into the air, transforming Wembley into a sea of flickering light. The band, moved beyond words, joined in quietly with the opening chords of "Somebody to Love." Freddie didn't launch into the song with his usual power. Instead, he began softly, letting the crowd carry the first chorus as though the entire stadium was answering Anna's question together. In that moment, a new bond was forged. The envelope in Freddie's hand became the night's enduring symbol, the proof that compassion could stop even the greatest spectacle on earth and transform it into something eternal. The next morning, newspapers across Britain struggled to capture what had happened at Wembley. Headlines didn't speak of Queen's flawless performance or Freddie's soaring notes. They spoke of the silence, the question, and the answer that left the greatest showman in rock history momentarily speechless. "Mercury pauses the music for love," one tabloid declared. Another called it, "The night a fan stopped the show." Fans who had been there described it as almost sacred. Letters poured into Queen's office from people who said that moment gave them courage to face illness, heartbreak, or loneliness. Many wrote that they hadn't come to Wembley for wisdom, but they left with a sentence that would live inside them. "Love is the only thing that ever saved me." For Freddie himself, those words became more than a reply to a stranger. Friends close to him later admitted he spoke about Anna often, replaying in his mind the vulnerability of that instant. It was as if the fans' question had stripped away every layer of performance and forced him to look at his own life with raw honesty. In quieter moments, he confessed that answering her had been harder than singing to 1 million people. The envelope, which Anna had placed in his hands, never left Freddie's dressing room trunk. Those who saw it described it as worn and simple, yet guarded with unusual care. Some say it contained a letter about a loved one who was ill. Others believe it was a prayer. The truth never became public. What mattered was what it represented, the reminder that music at its best is not about fame or spectacle, but about touching a single soul. Years later, when Wembley was remembered for Queen's iconic performance, those who were there still spoke of the night the concert stopped, not because of sound failure, not because of chaos, but because of a question whispered from the crowd, and the answer that turned into a legacy, as the final chords of Somebody to Love faded into the warm summer night. Freddie held Anna's hand high, letting the crowd see not just a fan, but a reminder of what truly matters. Wembley shook with applause, not the wild hysteria of rock and roll, but the kind that comes when 70,000 strangers witness something human, raw, unforgettable. For Freddie, the show was no longer just another concert on Queen's Grand Tour. It became a night etched into his soul, when one voice out of thousands dared to ask a question that stripped him bare and left him answering not as a star, but as a man. And for the audience, it was proof that music is more than entertainment. It is communion, compassion, and the courage to pause even the loudest noise for the quietest plea. Decades later, those who were there still speak of it with reverence. They don't recall every song or every light cue. They remember the silence, the envelope, the words Freddie whispered, "Love is the only thing that ever saved me." Those words became the legacy of that night, carried in the hearts of thousands, who left Wembley believing a little more deeply in love's power. And maybe that is the true magic of Freddie Mercury. Not just the voice that could shake the heavens, but the heart that could stop the world long enough to remind us what makes life worth living. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment about a moment when love saved you too. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the greatest legends are not in the music itself, but in the humanity behind it.